Welcome to the MMHP in the 989. Channeling all styles and eras of Michigan music history from the city by the bay. And now, here's your host, Scott Baker.
We're back here at Studio 163, just like that, fresh. I like that. We're here for a very special podcast. We're coming in on a Saturday to get a good friend of ours, one of the most legendary artists of the time, and I'm going to let Gary run with the ball. Dr. J's in the house, Sir Fred's in the house, Mike Beatty's in the house. Everybody doing good?
Doing great.
Doing real good.
Well,
Excellent.
I'm going to let you introduce him, Gary. This is such a magical time because we just had a wonderful couple hours with the man downtown.
Yeah, we are lucky to have a world-renowned poster artist with us, Mr. Dennis Loren. This guy has done so much great work, and we're so appreciative that he loaned us 17 posters that are at the Michigan Rock and Roll Legends Hall of Fame exhibit at the Historical Museum of Bay County. So you can see Dennis's work up close and personal, and we've got him here to share stories about his life and career. And so we'll let it roll right here, Dennis. Let's just start out with a little bit of your background. You were born in Detroit,
Yep.
but you went to school in Dearborn, right?
I briefly, my mother passed away in 1950, and my dad and brother and I lived with my grandparents till my dad remarried. Then in 58, we moved to Dearborn. So I went to junior high and high school there.
And that's really where you got the groundwork for your art career, right?
Yeah, other than, my grandmother was always giving me paints and pencils, colored pencils, and, art supplies, and she encouraged my art too. But certainly the things I learned at print shop at Etzelford High School were pivotal in learning. I even though I went to, art school for a while, it was more about drawing and not so much design. So I really learned more about graphic design in high school.
Okay, and that was Dearborn.
Yeah, Dearborn.
Etzelford.
Yeah.
Right. Now you had an aunt.
Yeah.
That was a teacher. Did she teach at Etzelford also?
No, she. The oldest high school in Dearborn was Fordson, over on Ford Road, and that has really great old architecture. It's like some of the buildings here in Bay City, and there's turrets and things. Anyway, she was an English and drama teacher, and one of the reasons she encouraged my folks to buy the house in Dearborn. And anyway, she was Russ Gibbs' teacher. But Russ Gibb tells a funny story because later on, after he'd made money in concerts and different things he had done, he started to invest in movies, like you see executive producer, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And one of the movies he was involved in was the Dead Poets Society with Robin Williams. Wow. Now, Robin Williams' character, Russ told me this story in a room with some of his students. And he formed a scholarship fund for Michigan students that were interested to go to film school at UCLA.
Right. He had a video class.
He did. Yeah.
In high school.
It won awards.
It was famous.
Yeah, back porch video, they called it.
Right. And, really very few people probably know that about Russ Gibb. He's so famous for the Grande,
right.
His rock and roll stuff. But yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah, so anyway, my aunt this is what he told the students, and I had never heard this story. He said that the Robin Williams character is a composite of three teachers. A teacher from a military school, a private school, and my aunt. And when you see Robin Williams get up on the steps and go, start reciting Shakespeare, that's my aunt.
Wow.
Because she had all these greaser juvenile delinquents, in the 50s.
Right.
And just to get their attention, she'd climb up on the desk and, it might not be Shakespeare, but,
Right.
she would do antics like that to get their attention,
And you got to know Russ at least fairly well, right?
Yeah.
It was that through your
Yeah,
aunt,
he came to my aunt's funeral. That's how much she impressed him.
Wow.
So,
And we have a poster of the Russ Gibb Memorial
yeah.
up at the Historical Museum, and maybe you just kind of tell us a little bit about how you got involved in that.
Yeah, I had been to Russ's house a few times because they had a show at the Detroit Historical Museum of Gary Grimshaw's grandeur work. And John Sinclair was there, and Carl Lundgren, who also did grandeur posters, was there, and Gary's wife. And I rode to that thing with Russ and his crew. And so I have a picture. Laura had asked me to do a poster for that event, and so I have a picture in the museum with Russ Gibb. He's in a wheelchair by this time, but he's holding up the poster, and I'm just sort of behind him.
So when Russ died, you actually designed a poster and then submitted it for the memorial? Is that, if I'm trying to remember what you told me in this story?
What I did was I designed it, and I didn't know who was putting on the memorial, but I knew it was going to happen. So I wasn't quite finished, but I posted what I had on Facebook, and then suddenly I got emails from people that saying, we have to have that, finish up the text and we'll find a way to print it, so same people that published the book published that one.
Wow.
So
yeah, one icon doing a poster of another icon. Yeah,
That's cool.
yeah.
Okay, you had during a presentation today, you talked about how you happened to be in San Francisco right on the cusp of the Summer of Love. Talk about timing.
Yeah.
Maybe you could kind of give us a little background on how that happened.
Yeah, I was going to, they called it the Society of Arts and Crafts back in the mid-'60s, what's now called Center for Creative Studies, or CCS.
And this is in Detroit?
Detroit, yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, I was working a full-time job and went to the art school in the evenings for about 3 hours. And I, at some point, about a year after I graduated from high school, Dad says, there's a letter for you. And it was a draft notice. So I was probably in one of the first call-ups after Gulf of Tonkin. And while I was in basic training, at this point I thought, I'm going to die, I'm headed for Vietnam. And they give you a battery of tests, and I passed some tests. And instead of sending me to advanced infantry, they sent me to code school in Fort Devens, Massachusetts, where I learned International Morse, and the way they teach it is like Pavlov's dog. You respond to sound. So they have what they call, it looks like a typewriter, but it's a mill. It has no punctuation and no lowercase. It's just all caps. Because usually in Morse, especially in encrypted Morse, they come in 5-letter bursts. So you'd hear dotty-dot and hit A or B or, whatever. You'd respond to the sound. And that's the way they teach it. And they teach it to everybody, and then they kind of divert you into different things. And ultimately, we would work in teams, and I was diverted into direction finding. In other words, actually finding the signal that we were trying to intercept and break down the code. And so after my training at Fort Devens, I was sent to Sinop, Turkey, which is now right across the 150 miles across the Black Sea, where Ukraine is now.
Oh,
And it was called the Kapustin Missile Range, and that's where they had all the nukes pointed at Europe and the Middle East. And so we were kind of the first line of defense.
how long were you there?
1 year. It was considered a hardship tour. So between all the training, by the time I came back to the States, number one, I couldn't go to Vietnam because I had access to classified information. So they sent me to 6th Army Intelligence at the Presidio, right in the, 3 or 4 months before the Summer of Love got all the publicity.
Now, is the Presidio in San Francisco?
Yeah, it's
or-
one of the few Army bases that at the time was within the city limits. It's in that area of San Francisco that Lombard Street approaches the Golden Gate Bridge. But if you went straight, you'd go into the Presidio.
Okay.
And it goes all the way back out to, toward the ocean,
Did you get kind of get involved with the music and poster scene while you were still in the service?
Oh, yeah. I found a little club called the Matrix that wasn't very far from the Presidio. That was the first place I found. And this was a club started by Marty Ballin when he needed some place for the Jefferson Airplane to play. It was an old pizza place, and they turned it into like a coffee house,
I remember on the back of the first Airplane album, was called Takes Off. I think there was a picture of them at the Matrix.
I think so, yeah.
Or a black and white shot
Yeah,
on the
yeah,
back
yeah.
of the album cover.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, they had a backdrop with like airplanes on it, If you look at that picture.
So you got to know members of the Airplane then at that point?
It was probably a gradual thing. Not at first. I was probably. I met Jim Gurley from Big Brother and the Holding Company first, because I brought a package from Ted Lucas out to him.
And Gurley was from Detroit,
Yes. Right? Yeah, and there were a number of people from Detroit. But Stanley Mouse was from Detroit, and Ellen Harmon, Jack Tolley were part of the Family Dog. There are more, but those names stand out, and I met them all pretty quickly.
Now, Jack Tolley, was he married to
No.
Signe Tolley? No, okay.
No, the other guy is entirely. In fact, he's from Detroit, not out there.
Okay.
She married some guy from Portland, I think. And anyway, I met Skip Spence. This is a story I didn't tell. In the summertime, I went to see the movie Don't Look Back, a Bob Dylan movie. I think it was called Don't Look Back.
Mm-hmm.
Right, documentary.
Yeah, and I went to that, and then I was going to get something to eat and then go back to the base. And it was interesting. I only spent a few months actually living in a barracks, because the colonel I worked for, I was in a small 5-man unit. He says, "You don't belong over there, so I'm going to give you per diem. Go find an apartment. We'll pay your rent and give you a food allowance." So I didn't even have to live at the Presidio anymore. And so I spent a lot of my off time wandering all over San Francisco, because they just dropped me in it.
Right? Wow.
And Matrix was one of the first places I discovered, and then soon I found the Avalon and different things. And then because I met different musicians, they put me on a list sometimes. Well, this particular day, I was coming out of the marina where this Presidio Theater was. And I think it was called the Presidio. And I was going to go up Fillmore Street, cross Lombard, and go up the hill toward the Haight-Ashbury and see if I'd find some place to eat on the way. And I was at the light of Fillmore and Lombard, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw this Rolls Royce coming at me out of the gas station. And this lady behind the wheel, she wasn't clutching the steering wheel. She had her hands up by her face, and she ended up hitting my car. So it wasn't badly damaged. It just sort of bent in the fender above my tire, and the guys at the gas station kind of pried it loose. They took her car back in, and she says, "Oh my God, my boyfriend, he just dropped me off to pick up the rolls because they had just fixed the brakes." I said, "I don't think so."
Bad job.
Yeah, bad job. So they took the rolls back in, and I said, "Well, now you're stuck. Can I take you, somewhere can I take you home or to, where your, boyfriend is?" And I didn't know who he was, but she said, "Yeah, he owns a club out in Sausalito called the Ark, and he'll take care of everything. He's got money," she said. I said, "I'm not worried about that, but I'd like to meet him. Maybe his insurance can pay for my damage, but that wasn't my big concern." So I dropped her off, and he didn't come out, but she came back out and said, "He's busy right now, but you can go to his office back in San Francisco, and he's got a rehearsal hall because he manages Moby Grape and It's a Beautiful Day and all these other San Francisco bands." And so I was given the address to his office, and the Monday I after work I just rolled over there and went in, and he had these guys. They all looked like bikers with Marlboros up in their t-shirts, sitting around this front office. And I didn't know, they didn't look like a band to me. So I found out later they were like bodyguards for him because he wasn't exactly well loved. You'll see his name, Matthew Cates, spelled K-A-T-Z, but he pronounced it Cates. On the first Airplane album, he managed the Airplane until Bill Graham was able to get him out of the contract. By the second album, he wasn't managing him. Mm-hmm. And he's one of the more notorious guys that ripped off. Let's put it this way. Moby Grape and It's a Beautiful Day had lawsuits with him going on 40 years. And over publishing, ownership of name. Moby Grape, when they fired him, he actually got 5 more guys and sent them out as Moby Grape.
Oh, similar story around here.
Yeah. So, anyway, my adventure starts like this. I tell the secretary, "I'm here to see Matthew. His girlfriend hit my car, and she said to come over here and he would take care of the insurance." But I said, I have all these songs I've written. Anyway, she disappears in a back office. Then I see this guy with a goatee and a pointed mustache, and he's got a cape on. He's like Mephistopheles, And he said, "Get the fuck out of my office." You can bleep that, hopefully.
Hey. All right, we're all good.
Yeah, we're good. No problem.
And he had these 2 guys, he pointed at them, and they picked me up literally and deposited me out on the sidewalk.
Whoa.
2 of these burly guys. I'm standing there sort of dazed, and down the steps from the rehearsal hall comes Skip Spence, and he goes, What's up, man? And he goes, I said, "Matthew just threw me out of his office," and he can be a prick, And he says, "Here, I'll put your name on the guest list for the Fillmore when we play next week." So then I had to go through Bill Graham. He didn't like to give freebies.
Oh boy!
So I had to. He let me in. I was on the list, but it was funny. So, after meeting members of Big Brother, I suddenly met members of Moby Grape, and
And you made your first posters, though, I think you said, when you were still in the service, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
How did that correlate? Like work during the day, the posters at night? Or were they aware of any of this that you were doing, or how did that work?
Oh no, my colonel had a clue. He knew. Let's put it this way: when you're getting your discharge, they have to give you what they call the re-up talk. And they'll pay you $2,000 bonus. To enlist. And he says, I'm not even going to bother with you because I don't think, and he was always nice to me. I wrote really good reports for him. His job was to inspect communication centers there were a lot of military bases around the Bay Area. You'd be surprised, probably because of World War II.
Right.
Naval bases, all kinds of things. So,
was he the one that also moved you to your own place?
Yeah, yeah.
So he took good care of you then.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, and he was getting out himself. He was getting ready to retire.
Yeah. Well, tell us about these first posters you made. The Hendrix is the one probably most people would be very interested in.
Yeah, I know it's been printed at least 3 times, at least, but maybe more. I don't know.
Had you heard him before you did the poster?
No, I heard Purple Haze on the radio.
Okay.
I had gone to Berkeley with somebody, and I heard Purple Haze, and I was parking the car, and then I just sat there, and listened. And when I was hanging the Youngbloods poster, these diggers, guys that were putting on concerts in the Panhandle, they were also giving away food to hungry people. They had like soup and bread. They'd go to the grocery stores and find out the day old stuff they were going to throw out.
Peter Coyote was involved in that, right?
Yes, he was.
Did you get to know him at all?
No, I didn't meet him till later, and then it was only casually. I didn't become bosom buddies with everybody I met,
right.
But you see him around and you can acknowledge him.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these diggers, they got involved with Hendrix putting in a...
Yeah, they put on the concert in the Panhandle where they were giving away soup and bread. It's pretty much documented by photographs by Jim Marshall. And it's a flatbed truck, and they had a generator. And they would have concerts. Ace of Cups have played there, and all kinds of people.
So the Jimi Hendrix Experience played on a flatbed truck?
Yes.
Wow.
In Golden Gate Park. And
did you see the show?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in that crowd somewhere.
And
A lot of people showed up,
That was the first time they'd been to San Francisco too?
Yeah, he was booked in. He was booked in with a Fillmore show for Jefferson Airplane and Gabar Zabo, kind of a gypsy guitar player, jazz guy, and kind of like a Django Reinhardt kind of guy, who did pop songs in a kind of a jazzy way. I think he even covered White Rabbit. So he had some commercial thing, because Bill Graham liked jazz too. He booked everybody from Miles Davis. He was very eclectic, and there was one concert I remember my friend David Singer did the poster for, and it was the Grateful Dead and Miles Davis that night.
Yeah, that's always had some very unusual combinations at his show, so very interesting.
Crazy Horse Miles.
Mm-hmm.
And like I say, he really, everything that he did was based on kind of what Chet had done with the Avalon Ballroom. Very eclectic shows, and
Family Dog.
Yeah, Bill Graham also, when he thought he could sell more tickets, there was like a place called Winterland where they had the Ice Capades and stuff like that, and it was a bigger venue, and depending on who it was, or sometimes he'd have 2 nights at the Fillmore and then 2 nights at the Winterland. And in 2 consecutive weekends, I saw, the first weekend I saw Pink Floyd with Syd Barrett still, and Procol Harum, who had a big hit with Whiter Shade of Pale that summer. I think besides Sgt. Pepper, Somebody to Love, White Rabbit, and Whiter Shade of Pale were probably the biggest records of that summer. And H.P. Lovecraft was the opening act, and they had a hit too with White Ship. So it was an interesting show, Procol Harum, H.P. Lovecraft, and Pink Floyd. The next weekend was Procol Harum, The Doors, and Mount Rushmore, who had a couple, I think they were a Bay Area band with a couple albums on Dot Records. And that was also interesting. But in in later years, if it wasn't for the posters and looking at the art of the Fillmore book, I merged those 2 weekends, and I was telling people I forgot about Mount Rushmore, and I told people I saw Pink Floyd, Procol Harum, and The Doors at one concert.
Whoa. Now, were you still in the service at this point, or had you?
Oh no, I was out by then.
Okay.
Yeah. No, you know what it was? The music became like a religion. Thursday night I'd go to the Matrix, and it might be a band coming up, like Santana. I saw Santana with the original lineup with Marcus and Bob Livingston on drums.
Oh wow! Before I can't think of his name. Michael Shreve. Yeah.
And the Chimpito and the other guy, Mike Calabero or something.
Oh yeah.
Now, were you a mailman at this point, and a mailman for Santana?
Yes. I was also Chet Helm's mailman.
That was quite a route you had there.
Yeah, Kent Hollister, who worked with George Hunter on album covers for Quicksilver and It's a Beautiful Day. And there was also S. Clay Wilson. He was us underground cartoonist. And he was at the beginning of my route.
So was your route right in the Haight-Ashbury?
No. This was up in what they call Precita Hill.
Go ahead and say it. What's up? Go ahead. Announce it.
Package. He had a package that he delivered to Santana.
Oh, you delivered a package to Santana?
Yeah.
Yeah, tell about the package.
Yeah. He was sitting out on the porch one day, and I'd seen him several times before. I'd seen him at the Matrix play. But this is before they had their first album. And he goes, do you have a package in the truck for me? And I go, no, but, when it comes, I'll bring it to you right away. And so he bugged me every day, for a week. Finally, this box came from London. And I said, now, you have to open it because you bugged me all week. I got to know what's in this box, And it was a pair of snakeskin boots. And I said to him, now you can be a rock star.
The Woodstock boots. No, don't.
Yeah.
The Woodstock boots.
The Woodstock boots, yeah. So
I was thinking it was going to be something else.
now, see,
Right.
you would never get this just being a graphic designer.
Yeah.
You had to do a little time,
Yeah, really.
Oh, so did you with the Jefferson Airplane? I saw the Big Brother poster. Did any of them ever approach you about working on their records for them too? And even if it didn't work out,
later I did one of Marty Ballin's solo album covers.
I saw that cover. Yeah, that's cool. That would have been in the 90s or
something. Yeah, sometime in there.
Yeah.
You just kind of keep it in touch. I would do like when they reopened the Avalon Ballroom, I did a Jefferson Starship poster. And Marty and Paul and my friend Prairie Prince was on drums.
Oh, wow. Yeah, Prairie.
And he's pretty notorious. He's played with Have Drums Will Travel.
Yeah, he's been with Rundgren for the last few years. I keep seeing him on the Rundgren tours.
Yeah. And,
Tubes for sure.
Tubes for sure, yeah. So he was drumming with the Airplane then. And another friend of mine, Keith Graves, I think, was playing bass. Because I think they had... don't think they had David with them that night. David Freiberg, who had been in Quicksilver, but he's technically on the first Starship album with Grace and Paul.
Yeah.
He kind of took Marty's place. He had that kind of voice, and
Well, we were talking about your mail route.
Oh.
How long were you a mailman?
I decided to come back to Detroit in 1970, July 1970, and I transferred.
Okay, so yeah, I was
So
going
I
to say
did. I
that's a
think
pretty
I
good
did.
gig.
I
being a
did.
mailman.
I did about 2 years. Well, that's what everybody said when I quit. All my relatives were going, "You quit the post office?" The only person who had a job in the Depression was Uncle Joe. He was the mailman. And I said, well, it's just not, what I want to do with my life. If I can find a full-time job doing graphics, got to remember through all of this, I'm doing freelance stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it never really stopped
And
since.
the government took you to San Francisco, and the government took you back to the post office, back to Detroit.
Yeah, right. So thankfully, I didn't have to. I think I did about 3 years out there, and about 2 years here. So by 72, I got a job at an ad agency,
Okay,
and that was that. So
but you're still working in the music field doing.
yeah, I was during that period in the early 70s. I was doing my singer-songwriter thing too, with the Stone Soup album and stuff. I would just play at coffee houses. I tried out for a band, but they wanted me to learn all these covers, and I had all these songs I had written, So I just decided I'm not joining another band. I'm just gonna sing them myself.
Did you play in any of the well-known coffee houses in Detroit?
I played at the Ark in Ann Arbor.
Wow.
I played at. Well, there was a string of places. There was a place called the Crystal Wind on Joy Road in Detroit. And there was another place called the Hush Puppy in Grosse Pointe. There was just kind of a network. There was a place called the Hinge that was in the basement of the Ford Estate over there in Dearborn.
Okay.
And I just, fell in with a crowd of other singer-songwriters, and we were overlapping each other at these different coffee houses. This was when, John Denver and all the singer-songwriters, Carole King and, Joni Mitchell.
Well, you must have been at the Ark just about when it started then, right?
It was in the
Was
early
that
70s.
the early days?
I don't know when it started, but
Mid-60s, I think.
I thought it was
Was it?
around in the 60s, but
Okay.
I could be wrong. Maybe late 60s, early 70s.
It was in that house.
Yes, it was. That's where I played.
Right.
Yeah. And in fact, we had a night where all the people on the album played. We had a what do you call a record release party?
Mm-hmm.
But there were other places in Ann Arbor too. I have flyers. I didn't bring any with me, but I designed stuff for all my friends, and did a little newsletter, where everybody was playing, and this included Lansing area too. It's kind of what do you call it? A triangle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, when did you get involved with the Michigan rock bands like the Stooges, and you hit some posters at the MC5 and?
Well, yeah. That it's another just random factor. I moved into a house on 2nd near Wayne State University. It's now part of the campus. It's gone. And I shared the rent with 2 students and a guy named Rick Drutchess, who was the MC5 roadie. So Wayne would actually come over and play with my son with the electric trains and, sit in the living room and play trains.
We're talking about Wayne Kramer now?
Yeah, right, yeah. And So I just kind of fell into meeting those folks, which in a way, it was all waning for everybody then,
Right.
in the early, and Stooges were falling apart, MC5 were falling apart, and but I got on in the tail end of it, basically, and but it very quickly. I've always been very musically eclectic, so I love different genres of music, but I've been in bands, I've been solo, and I could appreciate the young new wave and punk bands too.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew people like Bob Tremaine, and he was the original keyboard player in what was then called the Motor City Mutants, and they had played at Free John Sinclair, events, and I have pictures of them with long hair, but suddenly they became the Mutants without the Motor City thing on, and they had skinny ties, and they were playing with the Romantics and the reruns.
There you go.
Destroy All Monsters, So I fell into that whole bunch of people because of Bob, And he was distributing all these singles that I was making the picture sleeves for, And this would have been the Blitz, Gold Mine, RPM, Westbound Records era before I worked at Cream, And
Now, Mike McDowell's a Facebook friend of mine.
Mine too.
Did you get to know Mike?
Yeah,
pretty well?
I did. I did his. Well, I don't know where I was, but I was at a record store and I found this little kind of mimeographed newsletter, and it was by a guy named Mike McDowell and Jim Hiddell, who was, I guess, his friend from Ann Arbor, and I thought the writing was kind of interesting, and I thought the concept was interesting, but they could expand it a little bit. And so I said, I'm sure you've got more stories. I met him at a record show. That was what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And, they had the records there, but they also had their little newsletter. So I said, why don't we put our heads together and I'll turn your newsletter into a little magazine. And Brian Buchanan, the publisher of Goldmine, who had just started up also for record collectors, he saw it and he hired me. I was still doing Blitz while I worked at Goldmine, and it overlapped until Mike McDowell moved to L.A. Brian at one point was doing the typesetting for both Goldmine and Blitz, so there's a lot of overlap during this period.
Did you design the covers on Goldmine?
Yeah.
Yes, those covers were pretty interesting. Back in, that was when it was
It was
sort
a
of
big
like
tabloid.
a newspaper.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah,
It was
right.
a big. Yeah, it was a tabloid. We had a real problem toward the end, before, just as Brian was selling it. We had to qualify for a certain postal thing, and you had to have a certain number of stories related to the ads, or you were a catalog. If you crossed over, you were a catalog with stories. You were in a magazine with ads.
Wow.
I was thinking it was about a second-class postal rate or something like that. They post office always gave right to the media, So people subscribing, we wanted to do that. So I had another problem. It started getting so thick, I had to limit it to 280 pages because the printer couldn't drive a staple through anything thicker.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning, I had the idea to make the auctions all in the middle so people could pull it out if they wanted to save the stories. And I think that's what we did. I wanted to print the auctions on yellow paper because they were obsolete once a month was gone,
Mm-hmm.
And I think in a way Goldmine kind of predated eBay,
Yeah.
because the people that bought it were the Krause Company, and they had magazines for
Collectors.
20 or 30. They had their own presses, everything, All they needed was they kept John Koenig, who was the advertising director, and they kept Jeff Tamarkin, who was the editor at the time. And the rest of us take a hike, you know. So I went over and had lunch with Armin at Westbound, and he said, "You've got all this knowledge, dude. Why don't you just..." So we tried 12 issues of RPM, which was called Record Profile Magazine, and
I have them all.
you do.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, that's it, you know, it's interesting because when Krause bought Goldmine, which it had been a monthly, to keep everybody boxed out of the market, they went twice a week, or twice a month.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't really compete with it. Plus, I was doing all the editorial, all the layout. It got a bit much, and so it wasn't growing. We had a good run of subscribers, but they were all due to renew, and so I pulled the plug at issue 12. And I was already doing album covers for Armin, so he wasn't so upset, and he's one of these guys that keeps his light under the bushel because he's making all this money with George Clinton and the Parliament Funkadelic and the Gospel label, which was also had several of those gospel records became secular hits. Elektra Records picked up the Clark Sisters' "You Brought the Sunshine" about a year or two after "Oh Happy Day" with Edwin Hawkins. So that kind of stuff was happening, and I felt bad that I couldn't pull it off, but I actually would rather do album covers than, even though I did one more magazine. Gary called me and said, we need somebody at Cream.
How long were you at Cream?
I was probably from about 85 to the early 90s.
Okay.
That was at the end, basically?
Yeah, I worked both in the Birmingham office and the Hollywood office. I was actually the last Michigan art director. So I grew up through... I worked for 5 different art directors over that period of time.
Was Charlie there at the time?
In the beginning.
Right.
And then... Barry Kramer died, and eventually his wife sold it to Arnold Levitt. Now, Arnold Levitt was an interesting guy. He went to high school with Simon and Garfunkel, and he was an accountant first for Marvel Comics, and then he went to work for Larry Flint. Everybody thinks Hustler, Larry Flint, porno and stuff, but Larry Flint owned 20 magazines. He owned a little publishing empire. And Arnold was his accountant. And so he, I think his father died, and his father was in the clothing business and left him the companies and some money. And so he bought Cream with it. And he had already started a couple of sports magazines because Gary and I worked on an issue called Ohio Football. And I don't know how you could do one magazine devoted to one state or one sport, but I guess there were like 3 pro teams, and it was a big deal. It's the Football Hall of Fame there?
The Canton, Ohio, right?
Right.
And I think, Ohio State.
So we covered everything
fans.
from pros to high school. And Gary and I just laid it out, but it was part of Arnold's empire. He's a very literal guy. He goes, he goes, what's this magazine about? It's about heavy metal. What are we going to call it? Metal. What are we going to call this one? Black Sounds. What are we going to call this one? Hockey Heroes. Like that. He had these really basic titles to the magazines. But they sold, and he got to the point where he was flying from New York to where he lived in L.A., and then he came to Detroit, and so he was on the plane all the time. So he decided to consolidate everything in L.A. And
That's where Cream moves to LA then?
yeah.
Did it lose its, that had that particular Michigan attitude?
Yeah, not really, because Bill Holship, who was one of the assistant editors, and John Kordosh, who had been the bass player for the Mutants, they were two editors, Dave DiMartino. So the Michigan editorial crew came out.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, no, it didn't lose its irreverence.
All right.
And we still had the goopy captions,
Are you in that movie that just came out on it?
No, I was actually filmed, but I was on the cutting room floor because they basically did the Lester Bangs era,
Mm-hmm.
and I can understand that,
Yeah, that's the most famous era.
Right.
So
But I was the last Michigan art director.
that was a loud blast of thunder.
Yeah, it was. I thought somebody hit a mic, and I'm like, I don't see any mics getting here.
Well, they were talking a big thunderstorm today, so we may be getting it.
So the Cream went out to L.A. Where'd that leave you? What were you doing then? You just jump right back on?
I was offered, the people that bought it after Arnold moved it to New York City, and I didn't trust them. These guys had Coke spoons and wide lapels, and Johnny D. Francesca, he put his arm around me. He says, "We'll take care of you." So I actually got my Rolodex out and called all the art directors I dealt with at different record companies and brought them my portfolio and said, the magazines moved to New York, and so that's what I did,
Now, you did some posters, or at least one poster with Iggy and the Stooges. Was that when they reunited?
Yes, that was for Coachella, and I couldn't resist to do Iggy as the Scream on, the Edvard Munch painting.
Pretty creative.
Yeah.
Did you get to know Iggy at all, or meet him, or?
No, I've only met him once or twice over the years, but he played at Bookies, and Gary had done a poster for the Bookies show, and the Mutants opened. Every night was a different opening act, and Iggy, and that was right around the time he was kind of making a comeback. He started getting more. Eventually, there was one, I think that Gary Grimshaw did the cover for when he was on A&M. It was called Instinct.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Gary Grimshaw cover.
Okay.
Yeah. I only did, there was a series of posters I did for the Whiskey A Go-Go, and there was a Stooges poster amongst that. And
yeah, that Whiskey A Go-Go
Yeah.
series was kind of interesting. Maybe you could kind of talk about that.
Well, I had been doing random ones ever since the 60s. I did this Velvet Underground one, mainly because somebody I knew Chicago was the opening act. They were still not called, they were Chicago Transit Authority, but they were opening for the Velvet Underground.
Oh, that's an unusual combo right there.
I was going to say, yeah.
That's a Fillmore gig.
Yeah, right. It was more eclectic in those days. You'd be surprised it wasn't so niche marketed. I think the niche marketing actually ruined things, because if you went to a concert in those days, you could see, B.B. King and what would be something different. One of the more psychedelic or folk rock bands.
Dick Wagner opened for BB out there.
That's right.
With Frost.
Yeah, I saw Frost.
He got to sit in that night. He said the only time he jammed with BB King, he says, I don't jam, Scott, but BB had me come up. I couldn't say no to that.
Right.
Out there in San Francisco.
Well, BB was like that when he played at Fillmore. He had a lot of jam sessions, especially on the toward the end of the set or on the last night or something. And I even played harmonica with BB one night at the Fillmore West.
How did that come about?
Well, we used to rehearse at this. I was in a group called Mercury Vapor, and we rehearsed at this place called Frontier Town. It was had been part of an amusement park, but it was an old West City where kids had birthday parties, and it had already closed. It had been closed for many years, and they were renting out rooms to rehearse, and we shared a space with another band called Steel Wool, and John Rosenstock was the lead guitar player, and he was also a road manager for Santana. And they were broken into before we moved our equipment in for Mercury Vapor. They stole all of Steel Wool's equipment. So he just rented the whole damn place, hired security, and started, this commercial studio for rock bands. He had everybody from the Buddy Miles Express to Steve Miller Band, and he it was 24/7, access. There were people there. There were security people there. It was much more safe. It wasn't just a room in the middle of the night somebody could break in. Follow the band van when they unloaded their equipment or something.
Were you there at the same time as B.B. King, or?
No, there was a bulletin board there, and we had a guitar player in our band called David Green. He loved B.B. King, and I said, here's your chance. There was a notice on the bulletin board he was going to jam on such and such night. So it was all about getting David over there and to jam with BB, like Dick Wagner did.
Yeah.
And we said, let's go. I happen to have a couple harmonicas in my pocket because we had just rehearsed. That's why we saw the notice. Anyway, make a long story short, Dave got petrified, and I got kind of mad at him, and not angry. I don't get mad really, and yell at people, but I just took my harmonicas and got in line behind Charlie Musselwhite, and so Charlie played one song with him, and then somebody came from the other side, a guitar player, and he played, and then Charlie came back and says, your turn. They had the harmonica line and the guitar line.
And that was at the Fillmore?
Yeah, this is the Fillmore West, which was the second Fillmore.
Okay.
It was originally called the Carousel Ballroom.
Okay, yep.
And had been run by the Airplane and the Dead, but they weren't business people. They were bands, and they brought Bill Graham in to sort it out, and it became the Fillmore West because it was a little bigger than the Fillmore Auditorium. But now the Fillmore in San Francisco is actually the original one.
Wow.
I saw Arthur Lee in Love there, and Arthur said, I played the Fillmore several times with Love, and he says, this reminds me of the original one. He said, this isn't the Fillmore West. He's just going off about it. And I go, yeah, there were two Fillmores. You're just confused.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
How long were you in Mercury Vapor?
Until I left, because it got to a point where it was down to a duo, and Joe, the lead guitar player, and I played as a patchwork, and we played North Beach coffee houses. And
So is this more of a folk rock band, or?
well, yeah, in a way. I don't know how to describe us. There was a little bit of folk rock. There was a little bit of blues. A little bit of. It was very eclectic, Like most of those San Francisco bands, they have so many influences,
Right.
I think what's distinctive about most San Francisco bands were the lead guitar players, the John Cipolinas, the Barry Meltons, and Jerry Miller and Moby Grape. Those guys were all unique. They had their own sound, and you had the craziness of like Skip Spence and the melody of Peter Lewis, but Moby Grape just had it all. And why they couldn't pull it off is just a comedy of errors.
Were you around when Skip recorded that Or solo album? That's to this day like one of those epic ones that everybody's looking for an original copy of and all that.
Well, he quit the band and he went to Nashville and did that by himself.
Oh,
and
in Nashville. Okay, I didn't know that.
Okay. He plays all the instruments.
Yeah.
And
Beck and Wilco did an album covering that whole record.
Yeah.
And it's pretty fantastic. It's so trippy. It's almost oddly unlistenable, the original, but it's so weird and fun.
He even if you listen to Moby Grape songs,
I got the compilation of them too. I love Moby Grape.
I mean, live. I don't think there was a San Francisco band that could beat them, including the Airplane. At the time, I thought they were the hottest thing, and I also consider Quicksilver up there, and Santana, and all these hot guitar players in one town.
You just mentioned Cipollona, and that reminds me of, I wanted to ask you after seeing your show earlier today. You were talking about the time you did work with Elvis Costello.
Yeah.
And Clover went over from San Francisco, and that was Huey Lewis when he hooked up with them over there. He was just backpacking, playing a harp, and he had jammed with them early on.
Yeah, he was a member of Clover, and and the first Elvis Costello album, they're the backing
They're the backing band. Yeah.
Right.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah. Nicola produced it, but then they had to find a new band for Elvis when Clover went home.
Right.
But there were several of the Bay Area bands went to, like I said, that Eggs Over Easy. This was what they called, I guess it was about the same time as whatever they would call in England glam rock. It was like a parallel, but it was called pub rock. And there was a real mixture of crazy bands. And Elvis Costello was in a band called Flip City, and I guess they played on a lot of bills with Eggs Over Easy, and that's how the bond formed. And Clover were amongst that too with Elvis,
Wonderful. I'm going to hit a pause here.
Yep.
And that cut us short on the first time meeting with Dennis for our podcast. He had started his day prior to that down at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on Washington Avenue in Bay City doing a seminar. We were able to get together again in the fall and do another 2 hours with Dennis, which we will have coming up next. And that storm that you could hear at the very end of this podcast here was very flooding here in Bay City, and Dennis rushed out with his team back to Detroit to try to beat whatever weather may have been coming, and we got lucky, as I said, that he could come back in the fall and do another 2 hours with us, which will be featured for the next 2 episodes. He ended up beating the hail and the rain and getting back safely, and we ended up cutting this one short. But we want to thank Dennis Loren for bringing his vision and his talents and his team all the way up to Bay City twice this year for this wonderful podcast. So please tune in for the next 2. You're not going to want to miss what Dennis has to say and the incredible backstory that he's led from Michigan to San Francisco and back again. Thank you.
The MMHP is hosted on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and our own Libsyn podcast site. You can also search MMHP989 on Facebook for up-to-the-minute information, as well as both Dr. J and Sir Fred's album picks of the week, posted every weekend. You can connect with Scott on the web at scottbakermusic.com, Dr. J at michiganrockandrolllegends.com, Sir Fred at fredrife.com, brought to you by Michigan Rock and Roll Legends, located both inside the Bay County Historical Museum on Washington Avenue, as well as Scotty's Sandbar on Evergreen Drive at the Bay City Middle Grounds.
On behalf of the hosts, Gary, Dr. J. Johnson, Sir Fred Rife, archivist and videographer Mike Beatty, and myself, this podcast wouldn't be here without Studio 163's Alan Garcia, the voice of MMHP, Mr. Eddie Switek, all of our guests, and you, the listeners.
You've been listening to the MMHP and the 989. From all of us at the podcast, we want to thank you for tuning in.
Listen to Shakin' Street and some of those songs on the second album, especially where Fred wrote a lot more. That should have been a really commercial album for them. One before, the one where they're all
Back in the USA.
Yeah. Yeah, that has my favorite songs. I like stuff on the third album too. I like Something on Everything, but
Yeah.
I thought Fred, started to really shine as a songwriter.
I agree. I thought the second album sounds better on CD than it did in the original vinyl. Yeah. It was like thin or something, it didn't have that kind of heaviness
Yeah.
that was such an important part of the MC5 sound. But they had some pretty commercial songs on there. I mean,
Yes. And of course I like Sister Ann, and I think that's the third album.
right.
And there's some stuff there too. I have a cassette somewhere that has some other recordings, but this came out on a label called Roar, Roir.
Yeah, that was the cassette only company.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got a few things on Roar
And
too.
that's an interesting compilation too.
Yeah,
I don't
some of
think-
that has come out on CD, although I haven't seen the
has it?
MC5.
Okay.
I know they had a real good collection of early New York Doll stuff.
Okay.
It was called
When they went on the DTK
A Hard
tour,
Night's Day or something like that. Yeah.
I said that they should get David Johansen and Sylvain, and then to replace Fred and
Oh, that would have been badass.
and Rob, because they were all had missing numbers,
Yeah, that'd have been cool.
Now
Wow.
Syl's passed
Yeah,
away,
Sylvain. David's the only one left, isn't he?
I think.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah.
Jerry
the Dolls.
Nolan's gone,
Right.
certainly.
Arthur Kane died a few years
Arthur was a
back.
friend of mine. Yeah, I have a picture with Arthur and Sylvain at some party in Hollywood. And they were,
Yep.
Maybe that's how we met. Because you say all those 45s,
Yeah.
the picture sleeves, like the ivories, and
they were up
The
in School
Mutants
Kids
and all-
Records probably, huh?
well, they were at either you brought them, because I got
Bob
them all
Tremaine
in
brought
a
'em.
package up at the
Bob-
Black Kettle Records up
Oh, okay.
here in Bay City.
Bob Tremaine was distributing a lot of that stuff.
Tremaine.
Remember Bob? Yeah.
That's right. Because somebody brought every single one of those.
Yeah.
I went,
Bob
wait a
kind of
minute.
became the distributor for that stuff.
Okay.
And I wish I'd known when he passed away. Somebody called and told me, but
Because I don't have any of them left. I sold them for
I'm
at
sure.
least $30 a piece.
well, I had a lot of people asking me, was there anything left?
Yeah.
But his roommate was a guy named Jim Donaldson, who was a literary professor over at Wayne State, but he passed away too. So we don't know where either of their, I mean, that guy had more books. There was no shelf, all the shelves were full. There were now stacks. This place, if you went in, it was like stacks of stuff, which is the way my living room's turning into now.
Only in your case, the
stuck in
stacks of
picture sleeves
posters.
for the Dennison's record. So I got boxes and now books and
And another one was Michael from Blitz magazine.
that's right.
All Room Blitz.
That's right.
I probably still have every copy of that magazine.
Is that right? Okay. Well, I'll come back for another
Oh,
event,
heck yeah.
sometime.
Heck yeah.
I mean, you're going to have other stuff going on, so I'll come up,